United States showed up in a green jumpsuit to federal court, where he got a rare legal win to postpone his first of two trials for all of 6 days. Now, while the president's former lawyer and fixer, we just learned, had at least 12 audio recordings, possibly with the president on them, which federal prosecutors now have in their possession. This, as the president himself lashes out in all different directions and provokes new fears about his apparent allegiance to Vladimir Putin. 1 week since he stood next to Putin in Helsinki and sided with the Russian president against the U.S. intelligence community, the president has undone all attempts at cleanup by his White House, tweeting today about the, quote, discredited Mueller witch hunt and how well he got along with Putin. So well, in fact, the president is now hoping that Putin will come visit him in Washington this fall. Meanwhile, Paul Manafort got a brief reprieve from jail today to attend a pretrial hearing in Virginia, where a federal judge agreed to push back his trial for bank fraud by 6 whole days. That means it is now set to start on July 31st. That's Paul Manafort right there. 1 week from tomorrow. Judge also crucially unsealed the names of 5 witnesses who've been granted immunity to testify, all of whom appear to have worked for financial institutions linked to Manafort. One is an employee of the Federal Savings Bank in Chicago, and that's significant because it gave Manafort a $60 million home loan. As NBC News reported back in February, those loans that they gave Manafort, totaling $16 million, may have been part of a quid pro quo deal with the bank president in exchange for a plum job at the White House. And that's important because that puts Manafort's case on the doorstep of the Trump administration. As the former campaign chairman goes on trial for his Ukraine work, we still don't know the outcome of the probe, whether he conspired or colluded with Russia to disrupt the election. After all, it was 2 years ago this week, Manafort famously and strenuously denied any ties to Russian oligarchs.
So to be clear, Mr. Trump has no financial relationships with any Russian oligarchs.
That's what he said. That's what I said. That's obviously what our position is.
Nailed it. Remains to be seen whether he'll testify in his own defense as effectively as he did there in that interview. While Manafort was in court today, we got another update on the federal investigation of Michael Cohen, another person in the president's inner circle, the president's one-time fixer, who set up, you'll recall, a shell company to pay off an adult actress with whom the president allegedly had an affair. And, crucially, who later used the same shell company to take millions of dollars from corporations seeking White House access. Payments that were not disclosed at the time, and various officials at those companies have subsequently lost their jobs after they were revealed. So we learned last week that Cohen secretly taped the president, remember that? Before the election, discussing payments to another woman, I know it gets confusing, with whom he had an alleged affair. And that, it turns out, was not Cohen's only recording. According today to a new court filing by the special master assigned to review the materials seized in the FBI raids on Cohen's properties, 12 audio tapes have now been turned over to prosecutors. That's after lawyers for the president withdrew their claim of attorney-client privilege. Cohen's new attorney, Clinton ally Lonnie Davis, tweeted earlier today, latest news, Michael Cohen tapes of conversations are being released by Donald Trump and his legal team who own and waive the privilege. Will Rudy Giuliani call these tapes exculpatory again? As I noted before, the tapes will speak for themselves. Spin can't change facts. To help break down the latest on Michael Cohen and the Manafort trial, I'm joined by NBC News national security and justice reporter Julia Ainsley, who has been covering both. Julia, let's start with Manafort. The 2 big pieces of news today, the 5 witnesses being unveiled. My sense was those names were all new to everyone covering the trial.
They were to me, and they're definitely not household names. I thought what was significant, Chris, is the name that wasn't on that list, and that's the lobbyist Tony Podesta. Coincidentally, he's the brother of John Podesta, whose emails were hacked and have been investigated through the Mueller probe. But Tony Podesta is a lobbyist who ran the Podesta Group, now defunct, really as a result of this work that he did with Paul Manafort when Paul Manafort was working for pro-Russian interests in Ukraine, and those financial dealings are at the heart of this whole matter. We knew, Tom Winter and I reported last fall, that Tony Podesta was under some scrutiny by Bob Mueller. So the fact that he's not on this list could mean 2 things. It could mean that Robert Mueller simply isn't as interested anymore in what he has to say, or it could mean that he's extremely interested in what he has to say and doesn't want to grant him immunity. All of the people on that list, whatever they give as a witness testimony against Paul Manafort, it will not be able to be used against them in prosecution. So it could be that there may be more prosecution prosecution surrounding this work that are still to come.
We should note that I believe Trump TV ran with a very big exclusive that Tony Podesta was going to be on that list, which appears to not be true. You'll be shocked to learn. In the Michael Cohen case, these 12 audio recordings turned over to the special master. What do we know about what those recordings are?
So we know that Trump's voice is on at least one of those recordings. And last night was we were discussing why in the world Trump's legal team would have allowed that one tape where they discussed Karen McDougal to be released. We thought, well, maybe there are other tapes that they were going to try to bring back. Again, their legal team had the right to decide whether or not they could use this. It's attorney-client privilege, and it really falls on the client, not the attorney, to decide whether or not they can be released. So it could be that they decided that the Karen McDougal tape, where they were discussing her, was more exculpatory than the other ones, and that they may be able to a little bit more worried about these other tapes, and in fact, that was one that they were okay with releasing.
So this is a key point, right? So they have control about waiving privilege. We don't know, I just want to be clear here, we don't know the total universe of tapes that may exist, right? That we just know the 12 are in FBI possession in investigators' hands. We don't know if there's others which they've essentially blocked because of privilege concerns.
That's right. And we know that they have just a vast amount of information. They raided Cohen's apartment, and they raided a hotel where he was staying, in his offices in May. So it's really taken them a long time. That's why they had to call in this special master to go through everything to see what could be used. So the universe is vast. Another thing this does tell us, though, Chris, is if we look at the timing of this, Michael Cohen was recording the conversations he was having with Donald Trump 2 months before the election. You record if you think someone may flip on you, if you think that your client could somehow end up being a liability for you. That would be Michael Cohen's reason for recording this. So it seems that he already knew he was dealing with someone who may turn out not to be on his side in the end.
Well, we should say Michael Cohen worked with Donald Trump for a long time, had a fairly good sense of the man's character, I think, after all of that time working with him. We should say that Giuliani says that they include a recording of a conversation between Cohen and Trump 2 months before the election. That's what you're referring, whose existence was made public last week. The other recordings, again, this is according to Giuliani, which, you know, who knows, right? The other recordings are conversations in which Cohen mentions the president to someone else. Those are being turned over. We should also note that the president tweeted about Cohen over the weekend. Inconceivable the government would break into a lawyer's office early in the morning. They didn't. They had a warrant. It's part of the Constitution. Almost unheard of. Even more inconceivable, a lawyer would tape a client. Totally unheard and perhaps illegal. Also not true. Good news is that your favorite president did nothing wrong. Good news indeed for the president and his allies, if in fact that's true. And I feel like we'll find out soon enough. NBC's Julia Ainsley, great to have you.
Thanks, Chris.
For more on the legal battles encircling the White House, I'm joined by former federal prosecutor Paul Butler and former Watergate prosecutor Nick Ackerman, both Msnbc legal analysts. So let's start on the Manafort part of this. Every lawyer that I talk to is like, why is this guy going to trial? He's totally dead to rights. Is that your assessment?
So he got a 6-day extension, which means he has about a week to decide if he's more afraid of the Russians or if he's more afraid of Robert Mueller. If he's more afraid of the Russians, he's going to go to trial and probably lose. He's charged with paper crimes, failing to register, tax evasion, bank crimes, really not difficult for a prosecutor to prove. He's a 69-year-old man looking at least 15 years in jail just for this one case, and he's got another trial coming up in D.C. So he's got mad exposure. Again, 95% of people who were prosecuted plead guilty. Why isn't this guy?
Yeah, and we should also say federal prosecutors, the cases they do bring to trial, they tend to have a very good record on those. I mean, the whole system is set up to get convictions, and that tends to be the case.
I mean, that's why the prosecutor puts all the evidence together in the first place. I mean, they actually are able to put together an indictment that is as foolproof as you can possibly make it. And this one is particularly foolproof. They've even anticipated the defenses. The old, I got it from the lawyer trick. Well, he lied to the lawyers.
Right.
And, oh, I got it from the accountants. But he lied to the accountants, according to the indictment. So every potential defense he has is blocked out by this indictment.
I mean, it's remarkable to me to consider the fact that this guy, who was the campaign manager of the sitting president of the United States, he's in court today in a green federal, green prison-issued jumpsuit, is going to be standing on trial for bank fraud, and Lord knows what else may be coming down the pike in just a week.
Lord knows what else, because one of the issues that the judge decided today was how much about the Russian investigation can be mentioned.